President Cyril Ramaphosa het verlede week in 'n verrassende wending die nasionale gesondheidsversekering vereers op ys geplaas. Hy het onderneem om geen deel van die wet in werking te stel nie, totdat die howe oor die grondwetlikheid daarvan uitspraak gelewer het nie. Om dit te bespreek verwelkom ek vir Theuns du Buisson van Solidariteits- en Navorsingsinstituut, Prof Alex van Heever van Wits Universiteit en Dr Simon Strachan van die Suid-Afrikaanse Forum vir Private Praktyke. Theuns, so julle het verlede week 'n skrywe van die president ontvang. Wat het dit gesê en watter soort regsaksies is tans aan die gang?
Ja, ons tans natuurlik die grootte wat nou voor die howe is die SAPPF en BHF se sake nie. Grondwethof wat daaroor gaan dat die president sy redes vir ondertekening moet gee om te bewys dis 'n rasionele persoon wat hierdie onderteken het, en dan natuurlik ons saak en verskeie ander sake deur verskeie litigante wat dan nou meer die inhoud van die wet self uitdaag. En ons het ook prosedurele elemente in ons saak, maar die kern is meer die wet self en die absolute onuitvoerbaarheid, onbekostigbaarheid en net die irrationaliteit van hierdie hele stelsel wat hulle voorstel. So ek glo die president soek nou 'n manier om uit dit te kom. Ek dink hy dalk 'n bloukie glo by Tesorie so net voor die begrotingsweek, en ek dink hy wil regtig nie redes gee hoekom hy die wet onderteken het nie, want daar kan nie goeie redes wees nie. Dis 'n onuitvoerbare plan. Suid-Afrika kan dit nie bekostig nie, en dit sal gesondheidsorg vernietig in Suid-Afrika.
Simon, just give us a bit of background. What does your case rest on?
So our case is challenging the behavior of the president when he assented to the act. In other words, did he rationally explore all the resources available to him? And remember, we run that case in the High Court in March last year, where the High Court found that, first of all, they did have jurisdiction to hear the matter, that the president's decision is in fact reviewable, and that he is required to produce the record. That is what is now being appealed, both the jurisdiction and whether the president's decision is reviewable. That's what is at the Constitutional Court. So that's the one angle of our case. The other is a frontal constitutional challenge that is sitting at the High Court. And it's about that the president in the last week has made this statement. So we've been saying since September last year that we would agree to a stay of the consolidation matters in the High Court. In other words, hold those while everything else in the Constitutional Court is clarified and judgment is given. We would only agree to it on the conditions that the NHI Act was not implemented in the interim. So what we actually have now is we have the president who said he will not bring any element of the Act into force, he won't promulgate it. We have the Minister of Health who said that he will not implement it. Well, he can't unless the president promulgates it. And the third is that we have an agreement with him that they will not apply for any more stay of legal proceedings. So the constitutional matters now. So the other part of this is the matter brought by the Western Cape and the BHF on the public participation process that was followed as the bill was being developed before it became an act. And they're saying that was not followed, did not follow constitutional reality, and therefore that's been challenged. So that is the case that the Constitutional Court is now deemed to be the one to focus on.
Alex, I mean, the NHI is being challenged on many fronts. Do you take the president's letter last week, do you take that as an early victory?
I think it's the beginning of the reality check for this legislation. It's the first indication that people are prepared to kind of let processes continue. But the Constitutional Court the two Constitutional Court challenges that are going to have to be heard first, if they are successful, essentially kill the matter there. That's why then all the other cases would be moot, and that's effectively why people are waiting, because the procedural one, if that succeeds, essentially means that the legislation is struck down in total. If that succeeds, and the next one, which is the case that SAPPF and BHF also brought, which deals with the president's assent to the legislation, was that did he apply his mind correctly? He has a key responsibility which he must follow before he signs legislation. He doesn't have wide discretion. That's part of the argument. And if that succeeds, then it goes back to Parliament. So the first two challenges effectively kill the act. And then the third one is if you then go into the merits of the act itself.
Dis het vroeër gepraat oor die feit dat dit begrotingsweek is. En die minister Enoch Konongwana het reeds gesê, weet, sy hoop is miskien dat die partye tot een of ander skikking kan kom. Is daar nog 'n kans daarvoor of gaan hierdie hofproses, soos Alex sê, moet uitdien en ons sal aan die einde van die dag weet of hierdie wet wettig, grondwetlik of nie grondwettig is nie?
Wel, die wet, daar is geen manier om het uit te voer nie, so of het grondwetlik is of nie. Op die ou end gaan hierdie wet sneuwel, want dit is 'n absoluut onuitvoerbare projek in Suid-Afrika. Dit spreek nie enige van die kernkwessies aan nie. So ja, ons is as solidariteit, en ek glo meeste van die ander litigante oop vir gesprekke. Ons het gesprekke aangevra ook. Al in die verlede, ons kry geen terugvoer van die departement van gesondheid nie. Om die waarheid te sê, hierdie konsessie oor implementering is 'n verrassing van die departement se kant af. Ons het daarvoor ook gevra. Mens sal eintlik dink dis vanselfsprekend dat jy nie belastingbetalers geld kan spandeer op iets wat nooit gaan gebeur nie. So ja, ons is oop vir gesprekke, ons is oop vir 'n skikking, maar ons sal nie enige skikking aangaan wat nasionale gesondheidsversekering of enige faset daarvan behels nie. Ons soek 'n alternatief. Ons het ook ons alternatief voorgestel, die Healthcare Funding Reform Bill wat voor die parlement is en daar bespreek word, glo ek, hoop ek. En ja, dit sal behels dat almal wat kan bydra tot die mediese fonds, moet bydra tot die fonds van hulle keuse om daai druk op die openbare sektor te verlig en mense toegang te gee, bekostigbare toegang tot private gesondheidsorg.
Simon, so some of the NHI pilot projects were started in 2011, and what do you think we've learned since then about how the NHI will be implemented?
Well, I hope what they've learned is how not to do it, and that it actually is not workable, because none of those pilot projects actually delivered anything of any value. And I think this is the crux of it, is that most of us sitting in court now are only there because we weren't heard. And from my organisation as healthcare professionals, we're looking at this going, we're looking after our colleagues who are the doctors, and we're looking after our patients, making sure that they've got access. So we've gone to court as a means of last resort. We've got very good cases. We're funding it ourselves. It's a long road. So the other important part of it is health reform. What has happened to health reform in this country over the last 17 to 20 years while this NHI has dragged on? And what is going to happen while the court cases drag on? Well, what's going to happen is that, and the minister's told us, that the NHI Act is law. He has a department, an NHI department, that have employed people, and they are going to continue preparing what they can prepare. Even though it's not promulgated, the work is going on in the background. And then if you look at the country and say, well, that's all well and good, what's happening on the ground to public services for health reform, for infrastructural development? What is happening in the private sector to implement the regulatory changes in the governance in the private sector that we know has been put forward by the Health Market Inquiry, that will go a long way to spreading the load, decreasing the risk, putting a cap on these massive trajectory of prices. Things like that have to happen all the time. And there are groups that are doing that. And Alex and I are part of the Universal Healthcare Access Coalition. We have sent a proposal to the President. We are sensitising this across the country and saying to everybody, here's the platform. Here's our proposal. We're not pretending that we know everything. Come and talk to us. If you've got a lot to say, come and say it to us so we can understand it.
Alex, but change is needed. I mean, we read in the paper over the weekend about a convicted fraudster being appointed CEO in a hospital in the Free State. But what if government comes, and we don't want to preempt the outcome or the judgments, what if government comes and say, well, we did try to change something and it was the NHI, it was struck down. What do you want us to do?
So the NHI doesn't address any of those things. So the fraud and the appointment of improper people, the irregular expenditure in the provinces, none of that stops with NHI. In fact, it reinforces it, because the part of what goes wrong in the provinces is the ability of members of the executive of government to appoint people like that. And they want to do that in the NHI as well, in regulators, throughout the entire structure. And what it does is it actually contaminates the political parties themselves, because the political parties now, to gain access individuals who want to gain access to the resources of the state take over factions within a particular political party, capture an executive position in the state, and they appoint and they capture the procurement architecture and take control of it, and they bleed the state dry. That's what we're seeing systematically. And when you see a fraudster being made the CEO, it's because they've got delegations. They've got the ability to procure at that level. And now, if we actually had a National Department of Health doing their job, you'd be saying, how do we close these gaps? It doesn't take an NHI. There is legislation. There are structural reforms that should be introduced. That's what we're kind of engaging on. If they were putting their effort into that, we would stop all of that, but they don't want to. And that's the worrying thing, is that the pursuit of the NHI is done as if that was a real reform, but in fact it's a protection of the existing ability to rape the state.
Strong words, Alex. Simon, what has this done in terms of, we've been speaking about this for decades, and you've been expressing concern and fear. What has it done for doctors and nurses that have seen this and perhaps thought, oh well, this is coming? Have we seen a brain drain?
So I think that we've seen a brain drain across all sectors in South Africa. Remember that delivery of healthcare is but one of the social determinants of health. You need education, you need energy, you need water, you need roads. And South Africans are living with difficulties in all of those areas. The issue now with health delivery is just like the cherry on the top. So yes, doctors are leaving because of it. We've seen the figures. But there is movement across all strands of people from the country because of the state that the country is in. But the real tragedy is what's happening in the system right now for those who have stayed. 800 unemployed doctors at the beginning of 2 years ago. I'm a pediatrician, that's what I do. There are fully qualified specialist pediatricians unemployed in this country. They can't go and work in the state because there are no posts. The number of training posts for specialists, the number of training posts for medical officers. So medical officers are those doctors who really do the hard work. Okay, they're not there to specialize, they're just there to get in and do what they love to do. Not enough posts. So the training of medical students is being affected because there aren't enough specialists in the private sector. The specialists are having to do the work rather than do the training. So the whole system is problematic from top to bottom. It's not just the private sector. And when the 800 unemployed doctors, the minister himself, he said, leave the country or join the private sector. The private sector in this country, as we know, has problems of its own. It can't absorb everybody. So it needs to have a distinct policy shift, a systematic structural reform, where we look at the way that we preserve the health workforce in this country, how we uplift them. Nursing sisters, from top to bottom, from those who are doing the most basic work in the wards to those doing the most specialized in newborn baby ICU care, for example. There's just not enough nurses.
Theuns, net laasens dan nou, indien dit geskrap word en dit die einde van die pad is van nasionale gesondheidsversekering, hoe gaan organisasies soos julle sin beklei vir die soort hervorming waarvan Simon en Alex praat?
Ja, ons het ons privaat wetsontwerp reeds op die tafel gesit en dan sal ons ook deur ondernemings soos akademia probeer om by opleiding betrokke te raak en regtig druk vir hervorming in die manier hoe alles in mekaar steek. Want Suid-Afrika is een van seker die enigste land in die wêreld waar ons tegelijkertyd werklose mediese personeel het en 'n enorme tekort aan dokters en ander mediese personeel. So daar kort dringend groot verandering in die stelsel. En die twee groot goed is die openbare sektor is oorlaai. En dit moet verlig word en privaat gesondheidsorg is hopeloos te duur. Mense het nie toegang daartoe nie. En as jy met die befondsingsgedeelte 'n groot hervorming kan teweegbring, dan kan jy aangaan met alles anders. Belangrike een is laat private instellings toe om mediese personeel op skaal op te lei en maak dit vir hulle aantreklik om hier te bly. Dan is meeste van ons probleme opgelos.
Theuns, Alex, Simon, thank you so much.